Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Friday, February 20th, and so aliens are real. Did you see that?
Aliens are real. No, I missed that. I'm sorry. That.
Or Trump is directing the Pentagon to release all this
Oh, okay. I
information
did
about
see
aliens and UFOs.
that. I,
So what is this just clearly a distraction, right? This is clearly
I
just
have no
slop that they're
idea.
giving.
I know
I,
people
um,
point out, yeah, that is. I think that's what many people are assuming, and that's probably a pretty safe assumption.
yeah, but these things, can this stuff work anymore? This distraction from the Epstein files, from the Iran war.
No, I
I mean, it
I
seems.
don't think so. Actually, Trump and the Republicans are in real trouble. It looks like they're poised for a wipeout in the elections this fall. Trump himself, his approval ratings are way down. And then all the polls show that um, the Democrats are experiencing a surge. They're 10% or 50, double digits, let's say 15% higher than where they were during the election last year. In comparison to the presidential election last year, there's just they have the enthusiasm or the anger or whatever it is that's driving them. And the Republicans have a lot of them, including Trump's base, are disappointed with Trump. And Epstein is a big part of that, because that was a promise. This was something he was going to do. It was part of draining the swamp, and he didn't do it. So anyway, yeah, Trump's in a lot of trouble. And I don't know if he's thinking this war is going to help him. It seems like it's quite the reverse. The polls show, I think, 21% actually approve of an attack on Iran. 49% are against. That's not very good. Usually you go into a war like this with very, very high support. You compare that to George W. Bush's war, where the support was, I think, well above 75% when he went in. So yeah, I don't. If he thinks that releasing UFO files is going to save him, I think he's miscalculating. Let's just put it that way.
Do you think that perhaps one of the reasons he is starting a war, or potentially, we think we'll start this war with Iran, is that once you're embroiled in a huge conflict like this, then can you just have wartime powers and go authoritarian? It's much easier to enact your policies, because this is what we saw, for example, in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Zelensky is just like, no, we're not doing any more elections. I am in charge of this
Yeah.
country forever, as long as this war is going on.
Right.
Is that what you're worried about?
I
here,
don't think
or?
so. I don't think that's Trump. I don't think he sees that far ahead. As I've said, he certainly doesn't play five-dimensional chess. I think people used to think that, trying to make sense of his very erratic statements and moves. But I don't think he even plays chess. He's not even very good at checkers. He does things impulsively, and
He's playing his own game.
yeah, I don't know. You're right, within his own head or something. I don't know. So I don't think that's the case. Of course, there is a danger that once you get in a war, and especially that war starts going bad, there may be the temptation to exercise war powers. We could go down that road. I'm not saying that we couldn't, but I don't think he's planning it that way. I've followed Trump for years, as we all have, and I see somebody who, again, shoots from the hip, acts impulsively. Sometimes his instincts are very good, especially when it comes to domestic politics, and that's why he was elected twice to the presidency. But he is not a strategic thinker. He just isn't. And I think in this case, he just stumbled into this war. He got talked into it by different people, including Netanyahu. And it was supposed to, it looks like it was supposed to be coordinated with the insurrection. That failed. He was there and he should have just pulled out, but he's doubling down on his error, and it's just not looking very good for him.
Yeah, you said the Democrats are surging. Is it true that they're truly surging in this midterm, or do you think that what we'll see is really a litmus test on whether or not these politicians are adopting, pro-Israel stances. If they say that if they take money from AIPAC, for example, or they're saying that, Israel has a right to defend itself. And do you think that's more the litmus test? Because I feel like that's where a lot of the American people are right now. They're sick of this two-party system. Nobody likes the Democrats. Nobody likes the Republicans. Everybody, when you look at it, there's a Uniparty. Out of all these congressmen, 80% of them, 90% of them are owned by Israel, owned by AIPAC. And then that's the issue now for so many voters, at least for people like me.
Yeah. I think it's still not the issue for the majority of voters, but it is an increasingly important issue, and it's an issue that people are passionate about. So I think it very well make the difference in a number of primaries. I hope that it'll be quite a few primaries where that makes a difference. Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's not that people have come to love the Democrats. Again, the approval ratings for the Democrats are very, very low. It's a case of the lesser of two evils. I think that's the way people are looking at it. And I think the situation here is somewhat analogous to what it was in Britain last year. When Keir Starmer was elected. Was it last year? I believe so. Or no, I think it was. Oh, okay. Well, maybe it was. Anyway, it doesn't matter. When Keir Starmer was elected, he actually won. Well, if you look at the popular vote, it wasn't that high, but he did trounce the conservatives. It was just because the people were so sick of the conservatives, Boris Johnson and the people that followed him, that they said, anything else, okay, I'll vote for Labour this time. And I think maybe we're seeing something now. Now it looks like the British people are ready to turn on Labour and kick him out. Keir Starmer is very unpopular, and his party in general is very unpopular, and we may see something similar play out in the U.S. If the Democrats, they might come in a great blue tide and wipe out the Republicans, gain a majority in both the Senate and the House, and then maybe they'll get a presidential candidate. They'll successfully elect one in 2028. But I don't think people will be happy with them any more than the British people are happy with Keir Starmer. That's because I think neither party is really addressing the structural problems. And even though, it looks like Trump's going to get us into this very unpopular war, it's just the Democrats really don't have a better record when it comes to issues of war and peace, of foreign policy.
Do you think there is a danger that when this war kicks off, that Trump would try to enact some wartime powers and consolidate control, or are institutions strong enough? Because has that happened in the past? I mean, during the Civil War, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, and there's political prisoners, things like this.
In the First World War too, I mean, there were some real violations of civil liberties. There's no question about it. I think there is a danger, and he's shown this tendency to just be very impatient with institutions and laws in general. He's in favor of the executive order as a solution, or as a kind of an instrument for dealing with all problems, instead of working with Congress to get legislation passed, which is, what he should have done, like in the case of the tariffs, because it really is Congress's province. And if he had done that, I think you could have a more solid, probably more carefully worked out tariff system that might have made sense, and that would be perceived by the world and by U.S. businesses as being semi-permanent, and then would really have the effects that you hope for, right? The idea is to bring investment back to the U.S. And if businesses see, well, this is not just Trump, waking up one day and deciding to do something, and he may very well reverse it 3 months from now. They look at it and say, oh, this is going to be in place for years to come. We can actually make some plans accordingly. We can invest this $1 billion in a factory here because we're sure that we'll have, this tariff protection for that period of time. At least, theoretically, and I think quite reasonably, you could believe that would happen. But he didn't do that. He just, again, he went to the executive orders. And we've seen that, I think, also with ICE. There's a real impatience with procedure. I think ICE completely has a right to arrest people and deport people who are illegally in the country. I mean, it's a matter of law. It's not like they're acting above the law if they do that, but they have actually ignored. They've gone beyond that. And, we don't have to talk about the recent violence, but just there are a lot of people that have been grabbed that and deported who actually had a right to be in this country. Maybe not a lot, but just even a few. I mean, that's rather alarming. There's just this impatience with actually following laws and procedures. And I think that really starts with Trump and goes all the way down into the agencies below him. So yeah, if we get into a real war, and this could turn out to be a real war rather than one of these made for TV midnight operations, there is that risk. Again, I could see Trump doing that.
Something about the United States is that we always said, this is a place where we don't have kings. This is we have institutions. There's a process. There's a system. But increasingly, it doesn't feel like that at all. Hold on, my dog is trying to break out. Give me 1 second. Okay, back. Yeah, so I was saying, like, it doesn't seem like the institutions that we thought are supposed to, do the process of declaring war, enacting these executive powers, like, it doesn't seem to be working, right? It is odd that it does feel like so much is just on the whim of what Trump feels. And that's not how it's supposed to be. That we wake up and like, oh, I hope our great leader doesn't take us to war today, or doesn't decide to be in a bad mood and try to deport more people or whatever it is. It's like, this is odd, right? This isn't the way that this isn't the way the country's supposed to work. But has it been like this for a long time and it's always been a lie?
Yeah, well, no, this is... Yeah, this is not all Trump by a long shot. Actually, there's been much discussion and of the growing powers concentrated in the presidency, which really the powers that the president shouldn't have according to our Constitution. So there's talk of I remember even years ago, decades ago, talk about this imperial presidency. Probably the best known, let's say, falling away from the Constitution is the failure the failure by Congress to declare war. The last time that was done was in World War II. And so that goes way back. And now everything is a police action. Clearly, like the Korean War, the Vietnam, those were real wars. And there should have been a declaration of war. And it should have been really debated in Congress. But it wasn't. And there is a move now, I think, by, again, Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna to force a vote on the upcoming Iran conflict. And hopefully thereby the hope is to restrain the president. But I don't think, even if they manage to pass it, and they probably won't, unfortunately, just most of the members of Congress are just have really ceded foreign policy and war-making powers to the president. And they shouldn't have done that, but that is something that has happened over the course of years and decades.
Do you think that if this Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna actually get this to vote on whether or not we go to war with Iran, that Congress would probably vote for it anyways, even though that the American people don't want this?
I'm afraid so. I think it's pretty safe to be cynical in this case. It's just that.
Well, it's that AIPAC map that you can see where it shows,
yeah, that's
members
a big part
that have
of it,
money bought by that bought by AIPAC,
right?
And it's just the whole Congress.
Because let's be honest, there's actually no reason. I think again it would be a mistake on the part of Israel, but the Israelis, certainly the Netanyahu administration is in favor of this war, and they're pushing for it openly now. And the reasons that are given for the war, which vary from day to day, it depends on when you ask Trump. They're all connected to Israel. They're not connected to the U.S. Your ballistic missile programs. We don't want missiles that can reach Israel. Okay, that's Israel, right? Your allies, we call them proxies, but they're allies. Like, you have to stop supporting your allies. Hezbollah, for example. Again, that's an enemy of Israel. It's not an enemy of the United States. It's all about Israel. There's no question about it. And yeah, you would hope. I don't think we're there yet. Maybe this war, if it happens, and it looks like it will, will be the true wake-up call, especially if it goes very badly, and there's a very good chance that it will, that it'll be the wake-up call. Again, because this is Trump's complete lack of preparation. There's always an effort to convince the population that this war is necessary. That's usually what leads up to a war. And he hasn't even bothered to do it. He's been too lazy to do it, or he's not even clear in his own mind why he's doing it.
Well, I think he probably doesn't want to do it, but he's just being forced to do it.
Yeah,
so I think it's hard to get the messaging out.
Right. I think, he's somebody convinced him like, okay, see those brave people in the streets of Tehran. We've got this great plan, just move in a few ships there and, we'll do something like we did in Venezuela and bam, 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 the government will be toppled. And he said, yeah, that would be great. And then he got there, the insurrection had been suppressed. And it became clear that, okay, none of these made for TV, in and out missions, that wasn't going to happen. But he had the ships there already, and they began to work on them and say, okay, you can have negotiations, but maybe to pressure, I'm just speculating, but I could see this happening, to pressure the Iranians, you got to bring in more ships. And, but that just creates its own momentum. And then meanwhile, he's being pressured again, by all the usual suspects, both in the media and within his administration and the lobby and the Israeli government. They're all pushing him in the same direction. And it looks like he's saying, I think it was yesterday, that, okay, yeah, if we're negotiating with Iran, but if, things will be really bad, or use some sort of, it'll be really bad for them, if they don't reach a deal, and it'll be really bad in probably 10 days is what he said. I think at another point he said 2 weeks, but then we're getting these leaks from various agencies of the U.S. government saying that it's more like 72 hours, and that was 24 hours ago. So I don't know, it doesn't look good. That's all.
Yeah. With Trump looking at it, you said a potential like wipeout during the midterms, and also this Epstein stuff that is not going away. There's this term now that we use to call the elites. We say the Epstein Class. That's a bad label to have, and I think it's very fitting. So I like using that Epstein Class. But if this is the case, then do you think this is also why the pressure is so extreme for Trump to do this now? Because then he understands, like, we may not be able to do this after the midterms. This Epstein stuff is starting to bury us all. And Israel as well. Israel's trying to do its best to say, this is not, it was Russia. It was Russia. It's nothing to do with us. But it's very clear.
I don't think that works.
It works on some people. Some people just will eat up anything.
Yeah.
It's anti-Russian. But
I think they were already anti-Russian and ready to believe it. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But anyways, it's just I think it's not. They can't distract from it. And there was recently, I don't know if you saw on X, it's breaking that from these documents that were released, these Epstein documents, that Israeli government officials installed surveillance and security in Epstein's house. So there's emails showing that. Yeah. So it's just, it becomes clearer and clearer. It's like, okay, well, this is an Israeli operation, right? If they're the ones that are coming here and installing it, who's this blackmail for? What's it for? Yeah. It's becoming clearer and clearer who Epstein was working for, where his allegiance was. Right. I'm sure he was a free agent in many ways. We can try to distort it, but we understand what his relationship with Israel was. Right. And he's a Zionist. He believes in this great Israel project. This is the Ehud Barak basically lived with Epstein. It seems like he visited him so many times. Right. There's all these email correspondences, and the Israeli government, from the Israeli consulate, apparently, like, we're installing this surveillance equipment for this blackmail material. Yeah. Like, yeah. If this gets out, and then all of a sudden, aliens are coming, and then, come on.
Yeah. Well, I don't have much to add to that. I think there's a very strong connection between, it's beyond that. I think it's safe to assume, you don't have absolute proof, but it's safe to assume that he was an Israeli intelligence asset. I think that's probably the right term to use. He wasn't an actual agent. He wasn't an employee of Mossad. And Mossad is, they actually denied that he was their agent. But they were, again, it was careful. They were careful in what they said. They didn't say that he wasn't an asset. And I think that that's probably correct. And he probably did work for other agencies. He was just part of that. We all know, that kind of
the Epstein class.
The Epstein class, exactly. And
it's crazy.
And I think a lot of those people do work with intelligence at various times in their lives. They have all these connections, and with governments and with criminal organizations, and that's that murky world of power networks that intelligence agencies find so useful.
Right. I mean, and also you saw, I'm sure, the news that the UK arrested the former Prince Andrew from Epstein. It was because of selling state secrets, basically giving state secrets to Epstein. Yeah. But now we have an actual arrest, and I think this is putting a lot of pressure now on the United States. The UK kind of threw the ball in the US courts, like, okay, we have the first arrest related to the Epstein. Now it's time for America to start making some moves as well. And it's clear that we don't want to do that, the Epstein class obviously doesn't want to.
Right.
So this pressure is building and building, and it's not going away. It's getting larger and larger. And we're actually seeing some, the first person finally arrested in the UK. Now, when we're going to see it here. And it's like what Thomas Massey said. It's like, you'll know that my bill to get these Epstein, this thing released is working when we see rich, powerful people being perp walked and being put in jail, like in handcuffs. That's when you know it's work. And we haven't seen that at all here in the United States. And people are screaming for it. And what is Trump going to do? Aliens and war with Iran,
Yeah, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's is going to get him out of the hole that he's in.
Yeah, but he can be sold that story. That's what I think is like when you're in this situation, this is what the way that I kind of understand it. It's like, if you're in that situation that Trump's in, it's like, well, what can you do?
Yeah.
Well, if the aliens don't work,
you can kind of look at it as a Hail Mary pass. I mean, just possibly this will be a successful, we have to admit it, that the Americans might succeed. Maybe they have some card up their sleeve, maybe they, and at least I think that by any really objective measure, it's not going to be successful. But perhaps it's something, something that'll be quick enough and, cause enough damage in Iran that Trump can claim success. I don't see that. I can't imagine how that will happen, but sometimes you usually can't imagine what does happen. So just for argument's sake, that he actually, succeeds in this. I still don't think it's going to be a big help, but he's hoping, this is his Hail Mary pass. And it's similar actually for Netanyahu. Again, he's faced with, the corruption charges, but also he's under a lot of scrutiny over October 7th and his responsibility, his failure to be prepared for it. Why did it happen? Why was our guard let down? That's a question that the Israelis are very fairly asking of their government, and very pointedly at Netanyahu, and it's causing him political problems. And then there's also the pressure to go ahead with phase 2 of the Trump peace plan, and he doesn't want to do that. So he too has a kind of an incentive to go for a Hail Mary pass. In other words, to behave recklessly, to go down the route to war. And that, maybe if he doesn't actually get war powers, it's just that in a wartime situation, everyone in Israel from the left to the right, they all defer to his authority more than they normally do. And they're willing to set aside all those domestic issues and again, rally around the flag. So I think both presidents are probably hoping for something similar. We'll see.
Yeah. It's crazy that you're saying Netanyahu just gets a lot of scrutiny for October 7th instead of the fact that Israelis should be upset about what's happened in Gaza, that this genocide has unfolded. Just the human, even the human cost, I mean, even if it wasn't for the human cost, the fact that now your country is an international pariah and the most hated country in the world because of this. Do you think that would be what they're upset about? It's hard for me to understand that.
Yeah.
But
it's with the exception of very few people, again, it's just, in general, there's just not an awareness of that, not a concern, again, a real concern for the people in Gaza and what was done. You say, well, maybe you're not concerned about them, but as you're pointing out, at least you should be concerned by the fact that you become an international pariah. But again, I guess it's this sense of security that comes from support from the U.S. They feel like that's eternal. It doesn't matter if the world hates us. That's because they're a bunch of anti-Semites. What can we do about it? That seems to be the response, again, pretty much across the political spectrum in Israel.
Yeah, when in these conflicts, it's always difficult to maintain impartiality. You always end up kind of going on one side or the other. But, when in conflicts like Ukraine and Russia war, I genuinely feel for both sides on the front line. I'm not happy when Ukrainians die. I'm not happy when Russians die. I hate it all.
Right.
It's awful. But I think it's very important for us to always try to empathize with the other side. Mm-hmm. But it's really sometimes difficult for me to do it when it comes with Israel. But I think we still need to try to understand where they're coming from, why they're behaving the way they're behaving. And the only explanation I could really have is that, they're victims of their own propaganda and they're brainwashed. And that's kind of the way that we need to look at it. And it doesn't excuse their behavior, obviously, but I'm just trying to, I don't want us to go and fall into just hating one side and just, it's
important.
a dangerous thing, but it's tough with this conflict.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of those people, of course, many of those people are otherwise decent, they're good spouses, good parents, or whatever, they're responsible members of their community. The problem is that, they have been brainwashed, as you said, to just regard these other people as not being entirely human. And that's a real problem. And I think, each person is responsible in some sense. It's not like you can excuse them. Well, you were brainwashed. Well, I think we all have to be somewhat complicit, in something like that. But, it's not like these people are thoroughly rotten. A lot of them have good qualities. I'm sure if we met them as individuals, we'd recognize those good qualities. But there is a sickness, let's say, that has infected this population. And it's, with real horrible consequences for the Palestinians, but really for the whole region.
Yeah, I have met Israelis before, just on my travels and hostels and stuff. And, just like you said, as a normal person, I actually, even though we did get in some arguments before I remember with one guy, but he decided just like, oh, let's just don't talk about this. But overall, I was just like, they are normal. They're nice. They're nice people. They were fun. This was obviously before this whole conflict. I think we do have to recognize that they are real people, that, they have been brainwashed, that they're in this, it's just tough. It's just tough when I see what's happening. And I'm seeing this one country leading my country into this potentially catastrophic war. I've been watching this genocide on my phone for over 2 years. It's just the only thing I can say is like, maybe they just don't know. They don't see it. That's the only kind of thing I can say. It's hard for me to like, it just, I
don't know. It's hard to,
I don't know what to do with this population though. Like after this is over and we see all the death and the suffering, like what happens like with these people, with this country that was supportive of this? It's a very difficult question.
Right. Our country bears quite a bit of the responsibility. And again, I would say that if you go back decades, Zionism was always a problem. It was always ugly. It was always about ethno-supremacism, but it hadn't reached the let's say, or fallen to the depths that it has right now. It just wasn't, it didn't have quite the same hold on the population. People were still capable. A good portion of the population was capable of, recognizing the humanity of Palestinians and actually having some concern and some awareness of the need to work out a modus vivendi. But that has changed over time, and I think a good part of the reason is that the U.S. threw its weight behind Zionism. You have to say that. It's just that it empowered the worst elements. Again, the Israelis would do sometimes. There were incidents, where a number of civilians were killed, whether it was in Lebanon or in the West Bank or whatever, and that actually created a reaction within Israel. It was something of an international incident. There had to be apologies and investigation that actually amounted to something. But over time, they found, again, it's like the more extreme elements of society discovered that there were no real consequences for their actions, for killing Palestinians in the West Bank or, seizing new territory. And it empowered that group. There were forces within Israeli society that could have put brakes on it, but it was just they had the 800-pound gorilla behind them. And then so now we have, I remember back in the 1980s, reading about the Kahanists, these really the extremists within Israel, the terrorists, really, Jewish terrorists. And they were considered, a fringe element within Israel. They were essentially banned, at least from political life. But they're now, we look at Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they're Kahanists. I mean, Netanyahu is half a Kahanist himself. So this terrorist fringe group has risen. And I think it could only all the way to the top. So now they're at the apex of power, that they are the people in charge in this country. And with a lot of popular support. It's not a coup. They rose with this popular support. And that could not have happened again if the U.S. actually had been, had placed conditions on its support. But that support was always unconditional. And that, again, favored those extremists. And now we actually have the most extreme of the extremists in charge.
And now we're looking at a catastrophic war because of this. And we have a genocide in Gaza also because of this. And yeah, America does hold a lot of the blame, but it's hard for me to believe. It's just difficult to think that after this long of suffering and genocide, denying baby formula and medicine and food, that the population has to be aware of it. And I can't understand how there aren't more people that are just saying this is just wrong.
Yeah.
These are children. I mean, I hear horrific stories. Yeah. I saw a story being shared on X. I don't know if it's true, but it could very well be. It was about just it might have been something from like one of the Breaking the Silence, some IDF soldiers saying that like they saw a 4-year-old boy playing in the rubble in Gaza, and his commander ran up, grabbed the boy, broke his leg, broke his arm, and just stomped him to death right there. 4-year-old boy. What is? I have a 4-year-old boy. How is it even possible that somebody could do that? And just saying that here there are no innocents. And when I hear something like that, and maybe this story was debunked. I never saw a community note or anything, so I don't know if it was. But when I see something like that, it's just how can I have any empathy for this side, this position, like these people? It's just like, what do we do here? This is monstrous, just absolutely monstrous. And we kind of, it's easy to forget when we see the number, now they say 71,000, but we know the number is much higher. But even if it was, how many of these were just little kids that you starved and that died in horrible conditions? And the ones that didn't die, the suffering they're going through. You're talking about malnutrition where kids are going blind because they don't have enough food. They're underdeveloped, all these horrific conditions and these issues. Even if you did survive, you may be missing limbs. It's just unconscionable. Mm-hmm. It's just so insane. And we can't end it. And instead of ending it, we're going into another war for this. Yeah. This is, I don't have a question.
No, what can you say?
I know.
But
anyways, Trump said 10 days, and
Yeah.
that was so now 9 days. I don't know, and he
Yeah.
said maybe 72 hours. Like, does this mean anything? I mean, he had that during the negotiations last time. He said 50 days or 60 days, I forget it was, and then on day 61 or 51, then Israel did the sneak attack. So
Right.
I'm wondering, it almost sounds like a weird duel. Do you think that's what's going to happen? It's like, okay, high noon on the 1st of March, we commence fire. Like, is that what this is? Or do you think that we'll attack earlier if we say
I
10
don't know.
days, 9 days?
Yeah. Again, we have these leaks. Now, the leaks may be genuine. I mean, people leaking, actual conversations or information that they have. There's also a possibility is that it's just part of a pressure campaign or to throw the Iranians off guard. When there's no intention to attack in the next few days, maybe, I guess they're frustrated with the Iranians because the Iranians aren't caving in the negotiations. They're saying, oh yeah, we can deal. You talk about placing restrictions or very intrusive inspections on our nuclear program, not a problem. We can work that out. There are lots of different ways we can do that. We've done it before. We can do it again. But they're not caving in. We still have a right to enrich. We still have a right to support our allies. We have a right to self-defense, and we're not going to surrender those rights. That they haven't. You hear, it surprises me, but I hear again and again these reports from, unnamed officials in the U.S. government is that they're angry, they're surprised by the Iranian reaction, and perhaps, that anger and that surprise extends all the way up to Trump. And his reaction is maybe it's just like, let's tell him we're going to strike in 72 hours or imply that and see if we can get him to cave in. I don't know. They may be genuine or there may be something else going on. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I was talking to you yesterday. You were saying that this conflict is keeping you up at night sometimes, and that you're really dreading it. Can you expand? Like, what are you picturing? What are you imagining? What is keeping you up?
Yeah, well, it's a horror of a completely unnecessary war. This is entirely a war of choice. And that's part of it. It's just I guess I'm first of all, I'm bothered because I'm an American and this is my government that is doing something that is just completely without any justification. The consequences of which, could really be horrific. Could even go nuclear. It's just that, or if any case, let's say if they succeed in their objective and they manage to actually topple the government, that means a kind of a Syria or Libya kind of scenario for Iran, this very large country. And that's misery for lots and lots of people. And none of those people deserved it. It means years of violence and chaos. And you say, yeah, okay, great. We destroyed another country. But then, but that probably won't happen. Probably the government is going to stand and they're going to fight back and there are going to be Americans killed. But in the meantime, there will be a lot of Iranians and probably Iraqis killed as well. It's just all this entirely unnecessary bloodshed that, like the case of the Ukraine war, it's a horrible war. You're right. And we should never we shouldn't ever think, this is sort of a football game and we're on one side or the other. This is a horrible war. And the sooner it ends, the better. But the Russians went into it. I think you could argue, a fair-minded person, well-informed person should say that Putin made a mistake by launching the SMO. You can argue that. But it's clear that the Russians felt that they were in real trouble and they were trying to avoid a full-scale war. Even though we always say full-scale invasion, it wasn't. They immediately went to negotiations. They were pushing for negotiations ahead of time. And the negotiations, what they were asking for was very, very reasonable. It's not like these things that are being asked of the Iranians, which is just total capitulation. They actually asking you to abide by your own constitution and the West in general to keep their promises that they made earlier, about NATO and about neutrality, that kind of thing. That above all, So anyway, the contrast is quite great. Again, the war there is horrible, but this is a war that's so entirely unnecessary and unjustified, and just based on lies and based on as a really unhealthy relationship. It's just sort of like part of it is just like looking at a member of your own family who has become schizophrenic or something. That must be a very, very painful experience to see something like that happen. And then to see him actually engage in violence against someone else. That's almost how I feel about it. It's just on every level. I just find it makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah, it feels like, there's so much violence and bloodshed. We just talked about what's going on in Gaza. Like, this needs to stop. It's necessary to stop Israel. And it's crazy that we're going to be doing this war on behalf of Israel. And I'm at this point where I want this, I shouldn't say I want this war, but I feel like it has to happen to stop Israel and to stop the United States doing what it's doing, or the Israeli control of the United States. Like, this has been the source of so much death and evil in the we just even want to talk about the Ukraine war as well. That is part of U.S. primacy. Our demand that the countries like Russia and China subjugate themselves to us, that we can push whatever we want, our military systems right in their backyard, and we'll break you apart. We'll do color revolutions to any of your smaller countries that are allies to you. It was clear that this is the problem. We need to end that. We need to accept multipolarity. Mm-hmm. And so it just feels like this is the war that will do that. Yeah. And so in my sense, it's like this, because if we don't do this, then we're just going to have to watch, Israel continue to slaughter people in Gaza, slaughter people in the West Bank, slaughter people in Syria, slaughter people in Lebanon, while the U.S. continues to grind wars through Eastern Europe, maybe start a conflict with China over Taiwan, continue this. It's like, it has to stop. And Iran is the one that's saying the buck stops here. This is it. And I think countries like China and Russia understand that. That's why they are backing them. They're like, okay. And you take this firm stance. And when we look back in the history books, it will be so clear that Iran was the rational actor, the moral actor in this conflict, that they were doing everything they could to avoid this war. And the United States steamed all the way around the world to start this unnecessary war on behalf of Israel.
Yeah. Well, I have to say what Mark Sloboda agrees with you. His argument is slightly different, but he says that this war, it's not like he's advocating the war, but he said this is a war that could end U.S.-led Western hegemony. And his thinking is essentially that if the U.S. gets into a real war of attrition with Iran, we will just use up the stockpiles that we have, and there will just be nothing left for Ukraine. And then the Ukrainians and the Americans will be forced to sue for peace in Ukraine. So he feels like this is a war that could have that effect. And that's certainly possible. That's a silver lining. I never want to wish a war on other people, especially, it's not my, I'm not in danger, but it's all those people living in Iran that are going to have to suffer the consequences. But there is a potential. There is a potential that it may be a wake up call, or more than that, it may be I think we've already seen the beginning of the end of U.S.-led Western hegemony, but this would be this would be a real acceleration of that trend. I think there's a very good chance of that, and that's if we survive this and it doesn't go nuclear, maybe there will be some positive consequences.
Yeah, the U.S. military with our $1.5 trillion budget. Is that possibly to be disentangled, or is it just the only way that this machine, this behemoth that has been marching forward around the world, is if the dollar really collapses and it can no longer fund itself?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's just, again, there's just too many people, powerful, wealthy people, are comfortable with the system the way it is, and they maybe hear the arguments about how we need to change, but they don't care. They're doing fine, and it's going to take a real serious crisis, a collapse, a catastrophe, I think, to wake people up. And again, hope that you wake people up and then they start to do what's needed. But there's always a chance in a crisis that, people grab the ball and run the wrong way down the field. We'll have all kinds of craziness come out of it. So it's be careful what you ask for. I think we have to go through that, but it's going to be a scary process. Let me just put it that way. Go through some kind of economic collapse. But it's like asking for war. You never really want to do it, but you know that it's going to happen and that it's become inevitable. You just hope that, that we come out in one piece. Or maybe in the case of the U.S., one piece wouldn't be the answer. Maybe we need to be several pieces, but we'd manage to survive to the other side.
Yeah, you say, of course, we never want war. But the thing is, the U.S. is constantly engaging war, provoking war. The thing that's different is that we don't suffer the consequences directly. Yeah. It's not our people dying. So it's like we don't care. We're killing people around the world constantly or funding their death. And we're funding this genocide in Gaza. It's the worst thing we've seen. And just it is just absolutely horrific. And now the U.S. will suffer consequences in this Iran war. And I think that's what unfortunately needs to happen. But, it just, like I'm an American. These are Americans that are on the bases. There's probably people from my high school that are, in the military that might be over there or on a ship or something like this. It's like, I don't want them to die, but it's like, I'm in this conflict. I know which is the right side, and it's not my country's side.
Yeah.
So it's just
that's a painful thing. That's part of why I just feel so sick to my stomach about this. Say, okay, if this is a war that we really need to fight, I understand we have to fight it. I don't want it, but it's going to be terrible, but it needs to be done. But that's you could have said that about World War II, for example. But you just can't say that about this. There's been no Pearl Harbor or any threat at all. Just the argument that somehow Iran is a threat to the U.S. is just beyond absurd.
Yeah, and what I am afraid of is that these American men and women that are on these ships or on these bases, that Netanyahu, maybe Trump himself, they want a fair number of them to die. Because if they do, then that will be able to stir up anger in the United States and get this war really going. So a lot more people can die. I feel like that's what it is. And there's an acceptable one. It's like, maybe if we let Iran kill 500, 1,000, sink one ship. We saw what Israel was trying to do with the USS Liberty. We know they don't have qualms with killing American servicemen. So
I don't think Trump wants that to happen. I really don't think so. I think he's always shown the instincts, to avoid that kind of thing. But I think probably Netanyahu was saying, yeah, it would be great, just like he was very happy about September 11th. He said this is going to be good for Israel. So he's probably thinking, something sort of, oh, good, help to talk this guy into a war. The more Americans die, the better. They're going to be. His hope is that will bring Israel and the U.S. closer, and there is a risk of that.
Our greatest ally.
Yeah.
That's just insane.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about, Dad?
Well,
regarding Iran?
Okay. Well, just one other thing I thought was worthy of mention is this kind of a dispute between the UK and the US over this war. The Brits have been expressing reluctance to become involved in this, and they've said that they really don't want the U.S. to use the Diego Garcia base, which is their territory now, but is leased to the U.S. It's kind of a joint UK-U.S. base. But I think Great Britain, at least technically, is the owner of this base, and they could prevent the U.S., at least according to law, according to the agreement they have, from using it. And also, they don't want them to use a base within the UK itself for attacks on Iran. Now they're saying they're reluctant to do it, so I think yeah, they're going to. But I think it's quite remarkable. I mean, this is quite unusual. You know, the UK is usually out in front. Is really eager, like a little yapping dog. Whenever the U.S. is talking about a war of aggression, they want to be a part of it, and rather than apply the brakes, they actually put their foot on the accelerator. They always urge the U.S. on, and they're make sure that they're involved in it, that some of the planes that are attacking are their planes, that kind of thing. But this time they're expressing real reluctance, and I kind of wonder what that's all about. It's hard to believe that they really care, they say they fear it's a violation of international law, which would be, that it's a war of aggression. But that's never stopped them in the past. They've always been happy to be part of U.S. wars of aggression. So maybe they have real worries about where this war is going to go, and they know it may be very unpopular. So they're kind of signaling to their own population, we're not part of this. We don't want to be a part of this. So don't blame us when the whole thing goes south. Now, we've seen something similar, of course, from the Gulf states, from Saudi Arabia, Jordan. They've all said that, we won't support operations. You can't use our airspace. Now, some of this, I think Jordan and the Saudi Arabia actually said that before the 12-day war, and it turned out that they actually did cooperate with the U.S. So how real that is, just like how real is the hesitation on the part of the U.K., I don't think it may not be very real, but it's remarkable that the U.K. is even talking this way. And I think that's maybe further warning, or that this war has not been very carefully thought out, and there could be bad consequences to it, very bad consequences.
Yeah, it's all falling apart, Dad. it's all coming apart at the seams. I mean, it needs to. It needs to. It's just, I hope we don't go nuclear, and I just feel like that's what's going to happen. It's just we have the state of Israel is just such an insane. The insane story. It's just I can't even. It feels like I'm in some science fiction movie. It's What is going on?
What you mean.
Like this. It's just, how did this happen? It's also just fascinating just how, all these conflicts lays the seeds for the next conflict. World War I led to World War II. World War II led to the creation of the state of Israel. And now look where we are now. It's like we've just gone full circle. It's like, just constantly every 50 years, we're just going to just start killing each other again. I don't get it. It's hopefully, will we always have war? Is this just something that's ingrained in us?
Yeah, there will always be war. There will always be conflict. I think that's just human nature. So again, like I said, I'm very much in favor of this multipolar world, but that won't be, the golden age. It won't be an age of eternal peace. We have every reason to believe that it will be more peaceful than what we have now. Because as I've pointed out, like every war that we're looking at is not being caused by multipolarity, really. It's caused by the Western hegemon, on insisting on maintaining, his hegemony. I think that's what you could say. And then, probably we don't need to go down that path, but I'll just say very briefly, too, maybe repeat more or less what I said earlier, that I'm also favoring multipolarity because it does allow civilizations to follow their own paths. And right now, each civilization is kind of under this threat from this, I think, essentially nihilistic kind of anti-civilization that has developed in the West, that is trying to impose universal ideology on all of them, and that's just not healthy. And that's lifted. That's something to celebrate. But let's not kid ourselves. It's not like there will be no more wars. I think you'll have Turkey there, for example, having dreams of reestablishing the Ottoman Empire, and the wars could break out. I think like the Syrian war, it was not just about Western hegemony. It was also about a local despot, you might say, or with dreams of reestablishing his own empire. And those kind of things will happen. But the scale of them should be lower, and the frequency should be lower. And then above all, we'll have, again, we'll have this Western, this kind of oppressive cloud will have finally been blown away. And that, again, civilizations will be able to breathe and become themselves again.
If we're in this big war, like if it kicks off next week or something, then will we be able to, and it turns into a regional war? Like we're supposed to host the World Cup. Will that thing be suspended? Like, can we do this? Like, I mean, it's just such a bad look for the United States on top of everything else, like.
Yeah.
Well, do you think that would always, I mean, I know it seems almost silly to bring sports into it, but that is something that a lot of people care deeply about. Right. And then maybe this could actually have a real impact on on ushering in the end of U.S. hegemony, because then it just becomes clear that, hey, the world hates America. We don't want to go here. Let's boycott the World Cup, whatever it is. You think?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I haven't thought about that, but you're right. It certainly is going to. It certainly should damage our soft power. Unfortunately, I think throughout the world, clearly Russia is alarmed, China is alarmed, and I think much of the world is really shocked by the behavior of the U.S. and they see what Israel is doing. Within the West, we don't see it. There hasn't been a single protest. This could be a lot worse than the Iraq War. I remember, when in the months leading up to the Iraq War, there were protests, including in Tennessee. It was there was a real effort to stop it, and there was something that was debated, in the press, on the news shows. You just don't find that, and that's true, throughout the Western world. So there's something wrong here. It's not just that we have some crazy people at the top, but there is just this strange apathy or that has spread to the population that's helping to make this all very possible. Maybe again, it's just it has to come home and hit them before they start to understand that this is really serious. It's for them, they just kind of think, well, those are bad people on the other side of the world and it's on TV and I don't care,
Right. But if all of a sudden they're like, hey, gas prices are high, the World Cup's canceled.
Yeah.
No, whoa, this is a problem.
Right.
Or, well, maybe the aliens will come out of the blue and save us. Maybe that's what we got to hope for. Okay, well, maybe we can end it there, Dad, unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, maybe just one thing that we can that may happen soon. Apparently, the Supreme Court may make a decision on Trump's tariffs. We're talking about his, use of the executive orders. And so, a lawsuit very popularly was brought against him for that reason. And the Supreme Court has been considering it. They may come out with a decision today, I've heard. There's a possibility, or it might be next week. And if they rule against him, and it seems like there's a real chance that they will, again, that would be a kind of a victory for our system to show there's still some integrity in it. Let's hope that they do. But it will cause some real chaos, and it's going to cause a lot of anger, I think, on the part of Trump. He obviously has invested a lot in these tariffs, and for him, they're, is a big part of his administration and his vision for America. And if he's deprived of this instrument, and worse than that, the U.S. government will actually have to refund all those importers that paid those tariffs over the last several months. So that'll be doing that. Yeah. So anyway, we'll see. Again, that may be, that will be a test. If that happens, is he just going to accept it, or is he going to look for, some other instrument of presidential power, to impose his will? We'll see.
Yeah. Do you think that the likelihood of us going to war with Iran increases even more once the Supreme Court says, like, hey, you can't do these tariffs? He's like, well, screw that. Boom.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, I think that's always a problem. It's within democracies is that, often these domestic issues are intractable. They require a lot of coalition building and whatever. And people like Trump that are impatient with it and not very good at it. And it's much easier to be commander in chief. It's just you issue these orders and boom, that must give you a sense of have real power. You do have real power when you do that, and those huge, aircraft carriers and this massive fleet is steaming across the seas towards the Arabian Sea, and you say, well, nobody can stop me from this, and that's basically true, unfortunately. In spite of what Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna are trying to do.
Okay, yeah, it's not looking good, Dad. The Epstein files, this Supreme Court ruling, aliens. It's clear that this all means Iran war. This is what it adds up to me.
Maybe the aliens will come out of their flying saucers and stop the war.
It's bad that's what I'm hoping for at this point. That means we're really, really grasping for straws. Okay, all right. Well, let's have a good weekend and pray that war doesn't break out over the weekend. Okay, all right. Have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
All right, bye bye.